listening to Kael's podcast. Glad you're here. All right, let's dive straight into the deep end, shall we? There's this little, well, maybe not so little, disagreement floating around evolution. The Bible, it often feels like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, right? You've probably heard it, maybe even felt it yourself. It sparks more debates than pineapple on pizza sometimes.
It really does. Yeah. It's a question that pops up, well, everywhere. Science class, Sunday school, dinner tables, and it leaves a lot of people feeling like they absolutely have to pick a side.
Exactly. But what if? Just what if the whole conflict, this whole showdown, is maybe based on a huge misunderstanding? Like, what if Genesis wasn't ever trying to be Darwin's lab notes, just, in ancient Hebrew? Are we asking it to do something kind of silly, like expecting your phone to churn butter?
That's a good way to put it. And that's really the core of what we want to explore today. What if Genesis 1 isn't trying to be a science textbook in disguise? What if its real goal, its purpose, is to communicate something much, much bigger? Something, frankly, that science hasn't really set up to address.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive, then for you sticking with us, and hey, you clicked play, so you're in, is to figure out what Genesis 1 actually wants to tell us. We're going to look at its literary style. Spoiler, it's not exactly a dry list of facts. And its ancient context, think sandals and scrolls, not satellites. Plus, how some really smart people, Christians throughout history, have understood it. So yeah, buckle up. Might be some aha moments coming.
Let's jump right in. If you open Genesis 1 expecting a, moment-by-moment scientifically precise account of creation, well, you hit some snags pretty fast. You're immediately going to raise an eyebrow, maybe. I mean, you've got light before the sun, plants showing up before the stars are even mentioned. If you're reading it strictly through a modern scientific lens, the sequence is, well, let's just say it's wildly inaccurate.
Wildly inaccurate. I like that. It's like saying my singing is enthusiastically off-key.
Yeah.
So, okay, if it's not trying to nail the scientific order, what's the actual point? What's the message?
Well, the view many scholars take is that Genesis 1 is primarily focused on revealing God's character, his immense power, his absolute authority, his fundamental goodness. And it's also establishing that creation itself is fundamentally good and that humanity has this, unique and dignified role within it.
Okay, so less about the how of assembly instructions and more about who's in charge and what's the overall vibe. That resonates, theologically speaking.
Exactly. And if you just look at the structure of Genesis 1, how it's put together, this theological focus gets even clearer. There's this really elegant symmetry, right?
Yeah.
Days 1 to 3, God is forming the basic realms or domains. Light, darkness, sky, waters, land, vegetation. Then days 4 to 6, he fills those realms. Sun and moon, birds and fish, animals and humans. It's a pattern. It's very deliberate.
Okay, like a cosmic architect, setting the stage, then bringing on the actors. That feels less like a random construction project and more like something carefully composed, almost poetic or liturgical even.
Precisely. And think about the repetition. Those repeated phrases. And God said. Then, and it was so. And there was evening and morning.
Right.
The emphasis on the number 7, the seventh day of rest, and that constant refrain, and God saw that it was good.
It has this rhythmic, almost chant-like quality. It reinforces that this isn't meant as a straightforward scientific or historical blow-by-blow.
So the form itself is telling us something about its purpose. A theological poem maybe set to the rhythm of Creation Week.
Yeah.
They kind of reframes the whole light before the sun thing. Maybe it's not a scientific error, but like a symbolic spotlight on God's first creative act, making light itself fundamental.
It certainly opens up that way of thinking, doesn't it? And even the language, the Hebrew itself, gives us some room. That word yom, usually translated day.
Yeah.
It can mean a 24-hour day, sure, but it can also mean a longer, unspecified period, an age, an era, just time. So the idea of a day in Genesis wasn't necessarily locked into a rigid 24-hour cycle from the get-go. There's interpretive flexibility baked right into the text. So even in the original language, it wasn't demanding a hyper-literal scientific reading necessarily. Interesting.
Absolutely. And this leads into some really fascinating work by scholars like John Walton. He proposes reading Genesis 1 less like a construction manual and more like a temple inauguration text.
A temple inauguration? How so?
Well, think about a temple or any sacred space. It's not just about the bricks and mortar, right?
Sure.
It becomes truly significant when it's dedicated, when it's set apart for a specific purpose, when its function is established.
Right, okay. The ceremony matters, declaring what it's for.
Exactly. Walton argues that Genesis 1 is primarily describing God ordering the cosmos, assigning roles and functions to everything within it. setting it up to work as his cosmic temple. So it's less about the material manufacturing process, how the stuff got made, and more about establishing the purpose and order of the universe as God's sacred space, where he dwells and reigns.
So the ancient reader wasn't necessarily asking how many atoms are in that star, but maybe more like, why is that star there? What's its job in God's ordered world?
That's the idea. The central question Genesis seems to be answering isn't how old is the planet. It's more like, who is ultimately in charge here, and what's the meaning behind all this existence?
Yeah.
That's the core theological stake Genesis is planting in the ground.
Wow. Okay. That really does shift the focus, doesn't it? It's like we've been arguing about the meter of a poem when we should have been listening to its message. Genesis is playing a different game.
And to really get what that game was, we kind of need to zoom out and look at the neighborhood Genesis grew up in. It wasn't written in isolation. It was definitely in dialogue, sometimes maybe even arguing, with other creation stories floating around the ancient Near East.
Ah, right. The other players on the block. Like those Babylonian myths, yeah. I remember hearing they were pretty dramatic. Lots of fighting gods and stuff.
That's putting it mildly. Yeah, take the Enuma Elish, the big Babylonian creation epic. It's all about this massive war between the gods. There's this chaos monster goddess, Tiamat, who gets defeated and literally sliced in half to make the sky and the earth. And humans. They're created basically as an afterthought from the blood of another troublesome god, basically to be slaves for the main gods. So, yeah, violence, conflict, chaos. That's the foundation.
Okay, sounds less like creation and more like the messy aftermath of a divine civil war. How does Genesis stack up against that?
It's night and day. It's a radical contrast. In Genesis, there's no cosmic battle, no committee of bickering deities, no primordial sea monster getting butchered.
No gore.
No gore. Instead, you have one single, sovereign, all-powerful God who simply speaks reality into existence, let there be light, and bang, there it is. Effortless authority.
Just the power of the word. No struggle needed.
Exactly. Creation in Genesis isn't some accidental byproduct of divine conflict. It's presented as intentional, orderly good. God brings order out of a formless state. He sets boundaries. He fills it with life. And crucially, humans aren't made as cosmic drudges. They're created in God's own image.
Yeah.
Given responsibility, stewardship over creation, and declared very good, blessed even. It's a totally different vision of reality and humanity's place in it.
That's a huge upgrade for humanity. From cosmic janitors to co-regents almost, image bearers with real dignity.
It was absolutely revolutionary in its ancient context. See, Genesis wasn't primarily trying to debunk flawed ancient science. They didn't have modern science anyway. It was aiming squarely at the flawed theology and cosmology of its neighbors. The polytheism, the idea that the world is inherently chaotic or born from violence, the low view of humanity.
So Genesis wasn't worried about competing with, like, future astrophysicists. It was making a powerful statement against the competing gods and worldviews of its own time.
Precisely. It's a profound theological declaration. Its core message shouts, creation is good, it's meaningful, it's ordered, and it's governed by one purposeful, powerful, and good God, not by chaotic forces or capricious deities. In that sense, you could almost call Genesis one a theological protest, reclaiming the universe as a sacred, ordered space under God's authority.
A theological protest. I really like that framing. So maybe when we get bogged down in the science debates, literal 6 days versus billions of years, we're kind of missing the main event, the revolutionary message Genesis was delivering back then.
It certainly helps bring clarity, doesn't it? When you understand the context, the literary style, you start to see what Genesis was really focused on communicating. And maybe, just maybe, that can help ease some of that tension we talked about right at the start. That feeling of having to choose.
Which brings us back to the big question people ask. So, is it possible? Can you actually believe in both evolution, the findings of modern science, and the Bible?
I think the answer is a clear yes. For many, many thoughtful Christians, it absolutely is.
But maybe, as you suggested, the better question isn't just can you, but digging deeper. What was Genesis really written to tell us?
Exactly. And when we approach Genesis, understanding its context and purpose, we see it's not trying to be a science textbook competing with, say, cosmology or biology. It's offering this timeless, powerful message. The universe isn't some random accident. Creation is good, purposeful, stemming from a good creator. Humans have inherent worth and a role to play. There's order and blessing intended for reality.
So it's not Genesis versus science, but maybe Genesis providing the why and the who, while science explores the how.
That's a very common and helpful way to see it. They're asking different kinds of questions using different kinds of language. Science describes the physical mechanisms, the what is. Faith, often drawing from texts like Genesis, explores the meaning, the purpose, the what it's all for.
Complementary lenses, maybe, giving us a richer, fuller picture of reality.
I think so. One lens shows us the intricate workings, the other shows us the value and the ultimate source. You arguably need both for a complete view.
Well put. All right, deep divers, that feels like a good place to pause for this round. We've covered a lot of ground.
We certainly have. It's a big topic.
Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.